So at that point, we're at the end of Helga. And then we have some new motives. Now, I've already discussed the overture in another video, which you should check out because it's very interesting. But the overture to Dargun has this motive. This motive for me is faith. And it will play a very important part in this opera because basically what it's about is bringing Christianity to Arkuna and to Rügen. And this will come in really big versions with the whole brass playing. So the opera ends with this because it's the big triumph of Absalon and all of the Christians coming in and making Pád Arkuna. Anyway, I should tell you a little bit about Dargun now. Anyway, now we're at the main opera, which is called Dargun. And this opera takes place 20 years after the pre-opera. Anyway, we're basically in Arkuna now, or Arkuna, or Arkun, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, we're not in Denmark anymore. That's the important part. Anyway, we're on a beach near the temple of Svantovit, and we meet Radana. Now, Radana is the dramatic soprano in this opera, and she's quite a character. She's kind of like a combination of Ortrud and Amneris and all the dragon ladies in all the great operas. Anyway, she's married to a prince named Rutan. Now, there are two princes. There's Rutan and his brother, Jaromir. The problem is, Radana is married to Rutan, but she hates him. She's in love with the other one, Jaromir, who's also, by the way, a tenor, just like her husband. Anyway, you see her at the beginning, and she's talking to, I'd call him the administrative assistant of Dargun, because Dargun's a big high priest now. He's very important. And his assistant is called Dolan. He's just a normal priest. Dargun is a high priest. He's very important. Anyway, he says, what does he want? And basically, I think Dargun wants to take over more of the world and maybe invade Denmark. Who knows? He has all kinds of interesting plans. And once Dolan, the assistant, leaves, Radana starts to carry on about how much she loves Jaromir and she'll do anything to have him because she's totally in love with him and she desperately wants him and all these things. Anyway, after she's finished with that, we hear some noise and it seems that there's a boat that's had some problems and somebody is drowned. It's a girl. And the fishermen are looking around and they're bringing on this girl who looks like she's dead. And on comes Absalon. Remember Absalon from the first part? Yes. He arrives in this opera and he basically looks at the girl and he revives her. It's kind of like, you know, it's a miracle. It's like Christ bringing back the dead. Anyway, so she's a little bit dazed and she wakes up and where am I and what's going on? And at this point, the brother that Radana loves, Jaromir, he comes in and he sees this girl and he's immediately in love. He loves her right away and she sees him and she's in love too. So we have these kind of young, sweet people who are falling in love with each other and Absalon says, okay, Margit. Oh, that's her name, Margit. Anyway, he says, Margit, we're going to go now. And they go away and Jaromir sings a big aria about how much he loves this girl and oh my God, she's wonderful and oh, I'm in love. Anyway, guess who shows up? Radana. And Jaromir says, hi Radana, how are you? And she says, oh, you know, he never understands what I want. And she's, you know, trying to interest him and it never works. Anyway, so she says, you know, Dargun wants to use you princes to do his bidding and, you know, do his dirty business. And so Jaromir says, really? Oh, then I must do something about that because it's not good. Anyway, at this point, there's a big chorus scene and it's a big arrival for Dargun who's had some big success somewhere with his army, and he's a big returning hero. It's kind of like Aida, you know, big choruses, like, here he comes, he makes a big entrance. And we do hear some of those motives again when he makes the entrance, some of the mysterious motives that we've had in the first part. Anyway, he shows up, and then he says, you know, I've had a big triumph, and I'm going to give gifts to everybody. And by the way, you princes, Jaromir and Rutan, I need you to do things for me, to help me with my next conquests and taking over the world, maybe. And Jaromir, because Radana has made him a little bit excited, says, I will not just do whatever you want anymore. I'm a prince, I'm free, I can do what I want, and I don't take orders from dictators. And everybody's like, oh my God, what did he say? Everybody's terrified because Dargun's very mean. And so everybody's totally petrified. And there's a big ensemble with everybody singing and talking about their feelings. And at the end of this thing, Dargun says, how dare you speak to me like that? I banish you away from this place, and you must go somewhere, like the forest. Because Jaromir said, I want to live like a free being, like animals are free. So Dargun says, you go live like an animal. And anybody who finds you can kill you just like they kill animals. And everybody's shocked. Oh, Hruza! That's what they all say at the time. Oh, horror! Another motive that we hear first in the overture is sung by the full chorus when Dargun comes in. So it's basically Dargun, the victorious ruler. It's very dramatic and very strong. And there's another motive in the overture which actually has to do with innocence as well. Remember this one, which is Helga's innocence maybe? But there's a new one. It goes like this. This one will have more to do with Margit. Now, Margit is this young woman who seemed to have drowned, but she actually didn't. She was revived by Absalom. And we're going to hear a lot of this motive later in the opera. Another motive that you hear in the overture will also become important later. It's kind of a mysterious motive. This comes at mysterious points in the opera too. When the Danish fleet is possibly arriving in the night, who knows? It's a horn, so it might be a horn call from the ship. The other motive that you hear in the overture at the end is going to be very important at the conclusion of the opera, because it basically is a big Te Deum, which basically means that Christianity has arrived. Very Christian and big. And it's interesting that it's actually played by an organ, so it really does feel like a big church moment. Then, when we get to the opera proper, the first act, which I've described, there's the character of Dolan, who is the, I call him the administrative assistant of Dargun. It's very kind of bureaucratic music, I'd say. He sounds like he works in an office, you know? Not very interesting person. Anyway. The next motive we hear has to do with Radana and her lust for Jaromir. It's a very passionate motive, but it's in minor, which means probably she's not going to get what she wants. This comes in many forms. It's in the basses often. It also happens in the violins. Very dramatic. Anyway, I call that Radana's lust. There's another motive that comes quite often. That is murder. And that's what Radana would really like to do. She'd like to somehow kill her husband so that she'll be free for Jaromir. So anytime you hear this motive, and it does come a lot in the opera. Anyway, As we go on, we have some kind of sweet, beach music, I'd say. This comes a few times. Nice beach music. That will come again in the opera at another point. Anyway, there's another motive that comes that has to do with Jaromir, and I told you that he stands up to Dargun and says, I don't need to serve a dictator, because I'm a free man, and this music is rather noble, I think. I think this basically is Jaromir's pride, maybe his courage, and basically his noble blood, and the fact that he's able to stand up for himself and speak his mind. And that, of course, is not very good, because Dargun gets very angry and banishes him from the kingdom. Those are the motives that appear up to the end of the first act.